In July 1937, labor protests in Barbados marked the beginning of a socio-economic change. In December 1951, we held the general election for the first time under universal suffrage, and in November 1966, we raised our flag for the first time as an independent nation. These moments sparked a process of Barbadian nation building and development, which sets among its core principles the empowerment of our people to live the lives they choose and value. They're the same principles of global and national social, economic, and environmental justice that drive the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals. Development is a journey. It is not an exercise, it's not a moment. The sustainability of that journey is more onerous for small island developing states. SIDS are intrinsically more vulnerable to a lack of diversification, to experiencing industries fall away after decades of dominance, to changing trade patterns and supply chains, and the risk of wipeout from a natural disaster. The hurricanes that pass through our region every year dwarf Barbados. As a result of these vulnerabilities, SIDS experience extreme cycles of success, collapse, and recovery. Our high measures of human development, or GDP, do not tell the story of these cycles and the vulnerability and fragility of the current development path. In 2018, the government of Barbados announced and began implementing our Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation, or BERT plan, to restore economic and social stability and place the country on a path of sustainable and inclusive growth. BERT's transformational anti-poverty and sectoral strategies are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. These strategies support greater equality, stronger social protection, broader access to economic advancement and enfranchisement, and greater investment in climate-resilient, carbon-neutral, and inclusive growth. The BERT plan, which received the backing of an IMF Extended Fund facility in October 2018, is unprecedented internationally in the degree to which it shares the burden of adjustment and reform, shifting it from falling too heavily on labor and the most vulnerable to capital and the visitor economy. Following a successful domestic and external debt restructuring, changes to the revenue and expenditure models, and increasing health, education, and social protection investments, these all began to bear fruit in key social and economic indicators that are included in the SDG framework. Then, COVID-19 hit. Governments were called upon to completely reprioritize and reorganize expenditure, to forge new supply chains, and to develop new financing structures in response. Overnight, we have seen the sharpest, most profound, and most far-reaching cessation of economic activity since the Great Depression of the 1930s, presenting, beyond the disease itself, a further threat to lives and livelihoods. Globally, there was a sudden stop of economic activity. Billions of people were sent home from work and millions laid off. Families were tipped into poverty. Decades of global human development progress have been put at risk. Travel and trade-dependent states were hit hardest. Their response held back by high indebtedness or not possessing a reserve currency that they could print. Barbados fit that bill all too perfectly. In the first 2 months of the fiscal year, government's revenue declined by 31% and expenditure increased by 21%. In 3 months, 38% of those enrolled in the national social security system had made a claim for unemployment. Unemployment in the informal sectors of the economy were likely to be higher still. Our systems were not designed for this kind of systemic collapse of economic activity. COVID-19 has been a monumental test of development in Barbados and everywhere else. It will reset every development baseline. We had to respond with an immediate and sharp scaling up of social protection investment and with fiscal and financial inclusion policies that will also impact our SDG targets. So my intervention this afternoon will focus on the adjustments that COVID has caused us to make to our own development path with respect to key goals and to the Global Partnership for Development. COVID-19 revealed 4 significant gaps in our social protection framework. We have in Barbados one of the most comprehensive social security systems for any developing country, but it is designed around a traditional view of work and not around a more flexible world of work, or around the increased number of self-employed, of small businesses, of the part-time or commission-paid worker. Many of those, therefore, who most needed support were not a part of the social security system. Secondly, survival and prosperity are realized in any country on the basis of care work, whether in the formal market or whether it is unpaid care in the household economy. Recuperation from illness, homeschooling, and other socioeconomic activities saw a move from the public to the private sphere that is not without cost. That thing that we alternatively call social fabric or resilience does not happen by magic or by accident. The resilience of individuals, of households, and countries is not free. It requires investment. Women and men who do care work in homes need investment in the things that make them most productive, whether basic goods like water or internet connectivity to digitally access services. And those who do this work in the formal market must be appropriately remunerated for the work that keeps entire societies turning over. As long as the care economy remains largely underpriced and undervalued, it becomes a thinner and thinner buffer to crisis and becomes less capable of playing its critical role of preparing our children and future generations in love and fostering their ability to care so that we can have the best chance to reject all forms of violence. Thirdly, we learned that resilience requires a population that eats fresh food, that eats well, and does not eat fast, convenient, and nutritionally poor foods. Resilience is connected to health, which is connected to nutrition, which is in turn connected to fiscal policies that support bringing agricultural lands and farmers back into production rather than simply buying more medicines for NCDs alone. Fourthly, individual vulnerability to COVID-19, we realized, lay on the same fault lines as inequality. No amount of resilience and development will prove sustainable if we do not permanently correct these inequalities. We make a deliberate policy choice to continue, therefore, to close the circle of enfranchisement. In this instance, economic enfranchisement that has been the primary focus of a post-independence Barbados. With respect to Goal 1 and new initiatives that relate to social protection and access to economic resources, Barbados has an extensive social safety net, which we have ring-fenced from expenditure cuts, and we've established a floor on social spending. COVID allowed us to see how people experience deprivations not just at one moment, but throughout their life cycle. While traditionally people have moved in and out of eligibility for cash or in-kind transfers, the pandemic has revealed different groups that need to be better served by our social protection system, and the different kinds of instruments and services required. In response, the government had to come up with some new immediate tools and quickly. We put an additional $20 million into a household survival program, allowing for a 40% increase at the welfare department in cash benefits to families and individuals who are already enrolled. We also established an Adopt Our Families program to support households that do not receive unemployment benefits and that, as a result of the pandemic, have no employed members of their households. This new program has also been supported by civil society and by the private sector. We also introduced a new business interruption benefit for the self-employed who are not eligible for unemployment benefits. We have so far paid out $2 million to 900 claimants. Further, we've introduced a small business wage subsidy for the months of the lockdown period and the restricted movement, where we subsidize up to 5 workers of a small business. During COVID, we embarked on an emergency program to reconnect those without water supply due to their inability to pay. This is an expansion of our policy where we're now seeking financing to replace over 5,000 pit toilets with flushing toilets inside homes. A progressive tariff system varies rates of large and commercial users in order to subsidize small and household users of both water and electricity. On Goal 3, which relates to reducing mortality from NCDs, we've devoted more resources to public health. Apart from repurposing an abandoned naval base as a new medical facility to directly deal with COVID so we would minimize the exposure of our regular main hospitals, a particular focus was our network of free polyclinics. They are on the front line of trying to prevent and treat non-communicable diseases. We've put resources into expanding access to these services by introducing 24-hour polyclinics and increasing the number of nurses. COVID brought home that resilience is not just about buildings, but about lives and livelihoods. And so we have accelerated our Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive, or FEED program, as we appreciate the need to build the immune systems of our people. This is a 3-year program designed to support food and nutrition security by bringing 750 acres and more people back into local agriculture. Fiscal policy has an important role to play to support public health beyond expenditure. We're examining ways to incentivize prevention with our Health for Wealth plan. Before COVID, we were also establishing a dedicated team of community nurses to monitor and work with the 2,000 patients most affected by NCDs in their homes. On Goal 4, access to skills, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship, to support individual development and freedom, we are investing heavily in skills training. We recently launched a $10 million a year National Transformation Initiative, a national effort in broad-based training and national consciousness engagement in a range of accessible formats for those in work or those who are looking for better work. In 2019, we also established a Barbados Youth Advanced Corps to ultimately allow 1,000 students a year for 2 years to expose them to a structured post-secondary program focusing on life skills and a range of vocational skills, and thereafter job experience. We have paused the intake at 500 as a result of the pandemic. Indeed, before COVID hit, we were working on a new $40 million modernization program designed to improve access to government services 24/7. A large part of this program includes digitizing existing records so as to expedite our move to an e-governance platform. We are well on the way. We're working on a paperless cabinet, are in the process of extending it to all ministries, and especially so in areas where the public is being served, like applications for certificates of character. We've recently amended the procurement associated with this program to give priority in training and employment to those who are newly unemployed. Access to finance is critical. We have a number of measures to support entrepreneurship, including our $10 million trust loan scheme. The Transport Board recently created a program where individuals could bid for bus routes, and in parallel, we developed our program of lending to small businesses by over $2 million to support bus drivers buying their own buses. On Goal 6, increasing water use efficiency and reducing scarcity, Barbados is a water-scarce country and is experiencing a severe drought that is driven by the climate crisis. It has drained our reservoirs. We have a multi-pronged approach to addressing this, which we've been pursuing during COVID. We're investing heavily in mending the network and reducing the substantial loss of non-revenue water. We're installing solar-powered pumps to improve resilience and lower energy costs. We're optimizing our use and cost of desalination of the brackish water around our coast. In terms of renewable energy and sustainability of the energy mix, we have a 100% fossil fuel-free target for 2030. But progress has been slow, with only a tiny proportion of the grid being powered by renewable energy. We've therefore reserved 15% of the renewable energy targets for water, given the tremendous expenditure associated with augmentation and distribution, 5% for the third sector, and 5% to guarantee reliable, affordable access to public transport. COVID brought home to us the need for greater resilience in our economy through more diversification and energy security. As a result, we've been developing with the Fair Trade Commission a new pricing framework. We will publish prices that will attract investment for a range of renewable energy types and sizes. This price will adjust down in a transparent, predictable, and limited way if the investors end up with above normal returns. This approach has already attracted a lot of interest. We're currently in the middle of a regulatory approval process for plants that will increase our supply of renewable energy threefold. In further measures to directly attack inequality, we will broaden our minimum wage requirement to all sectors of the economy, where previously it was focused on distributive trades and domestic help, and will raise its level by over 30%. Most investments in Barbados are privately held, and the ordinary public does not have access to investment opportunities. They're forced to put their savings into very low-yielding instruments at a commercial bank. We're trying to better democratize the ownership of assets. We now require those investors who benefit from any public financial incentives to offer shares to the broader public within a few years of operation. In support of this, we have approved new low-cost digital exchanges and widened the type of investments that insurance companies and credit unions can own. We're putting minimum local ownership requirements of 30% around investments in strategic industries like renewable energy and medical cannabis. Climate change has worsened drought conditions and increased the risk of devastating floods from a hurricane. We've so far been lucky with hurricanes. Our neighbors have been hit by storms that wiped out over 100% of GDP. But luck is not a strategy. It cannot be expected to hold. And the new hurricane season has just started. And there are other natural disasters to contend with, too, such as a global pandemic. We have a multidimensional strategy. We have revamped and tested our natural disaster management protocols. We are now, in Barbados, the world's leading issuer of bonds with natural disaster clauses. When an external agency declares a natural disaster has hit, interest and principal payments are suspended for 2 years. We have signed up for contingent credit lines offered by our regional development banks. And when these two things are added up, we will have access to close to 20% of GDP for 2 years in the event of a disaster. We are supporting and enforcing better building standards and codes. We encourage the use of natural disaster clauses for all to avoid a disorderly unraveling of legal obligations, and in the case of pandemics as well. Goal 17, Partnership for Development. We take responsibility for achieving sustainable development within our own country. We are standing up and we are pressing forward. But small economies are necessarily plugged into the international system. We import much of what we consume. We earn our daily bread by exporting to the world. Our financial system is foreign owned. We are the canaries in the mine of the international system. Today, for several reasons, the international system has become, for us, a source of risk. Global pandemics, climate change, even the explosion of non-communicable diseases are problems with external origins and solutions that require international agreements. We need effective international agreements that cap and lower global temperatures, that limit the spread of pandemics, supporting nutrition and energy security. But we also cannot afford to wait. Especially as a middle-income country, we need our vulnerability to be recognized and access to financing to help us build resilience to these external risks. Let us be clear. We earn too much to be considered poor and too little to be heard to secure policy space. We call for more significant mobilization of concessionary finance, especially for middle-income countries. The SG of the UN has more than once recognized the vulnerability of our countries. The time is past due for objective measures of vulnerability to be included in determining access to concessional funding. And we say that if ever there was a reason for an expansion of global liquidity through the issuance of SDRs to offset the destruction wrought by a worldwide pandemic or by climate change, it is now. Thank you.